right, so what you see behind me here is a bunch of different things that are going to be absolutely essential for getting into Totality and Infinity by Emmanuel Levinas. So, first of all, I want to welcome you all to this little public lecture. I don't really like to do lectures for a live audience, but today I'm just going to go at it all by myself, with you all here virtually in the future. So, Totality and Infinity is one of my favorite philosophy books. It's one of the most beautiful and thought-provoking and at the same time challenging works of philosophy from the history of philosophy that at the same time, like all good philosophy, actually challenges philosophy itself, not to mention all of our common sense, all the things that we take for granted, right? And so a couple of things that I want to say about it. First of all, it is challenging in two ways. It challenges our common sense. It challenges the priority of philosophy. It challenges the priority of politics. It challenges the priority of history, the stage of history, trying to be remembered by history. But it also is challenging just at the level of the way that it is written. I'll open it to a random page. The spontaneity of freedom is not called in question. Its limitation alone is held to be tragic and to constitute a scandal. Freedom is called in question only inasmuch as it somehow finds itself imposed upon itself. If I could have freely chosen my own existence, everything would be justified. The failure of my own spontaneity, still bereft of reason, awakens reason and theory. There would have been a suffering that would be the mother of wisdom. From failure alone would come the necessity of curbing violence and introducing order into human relations. Political theory derives justice from the undiscussed value of spontaneity. Its problem is to ensure, by way of knowledge of the world, the most complete exercise of spontaneity by reconciling my freedom with the freedom of others. It was just a little part that I opened up to, but I kind of want to read this next part because I heavily underlined it and I want to know why. This position admits not only the undiscussed value of spontaneity, but also the possibility of a rational being situated within the totality. The critique of spontaneity engendered by failure, which calls in question the central place the I occupies in the world, implies then a power to reflect on its failure and on the totality, an uprooting of the I, torn up from itself and living in the universal. It founds neither theory nor truth. It presupposes them. It proceeds from knowledge of the world, is already born from a knowledge, the knowledge of failure. The consciousness of failure is already theoretical. So what is he getting at? Well, I don't want to get too much into it because I was just trying to give you a sense for like how it actually reads, which for most people would be hard. Most people will just say that sounds like dog shit, but we're not doing this for most people. We're doing this for the kind of people who are already into theory, or at least getting into it. And this is definitely one of the more difficult texts, but everything in our education tells us that we should take little baby steps, and everything about Theory Underground has always been like, nah, man, just dive in. And the reasons are myriad. And so what I want to get into are the reasons why I think that just diving in the deep end is actually going to accelerate the development of your ability to think theoretically, but also to read different kinds of theory texts, which is kind of like it's like learning a lot of different languages. Like every one of these difficult, profound, and sort of classic primary works of philosophy that is essential at Theory Underground is its own language. It has its own vernacular. Every great thinker comes up with his or her own vernacular. Every single one of them comes up with his or her own vernacular. Every single one of them, including the logical positivist types of analytic bros who like try not to. They want to speak in this sort of universal, commonsensical, almost dictionary perfect kind of language, but they nevertheless develop their own unique vernacular and then use words in wildly different ways to most people. That's inescapable. It's inescapable. And it's a schooling system that doesn't care about you being genuinely multicultural or genuinely cosmopolitan or genuinely open to diversity. That kind of schooling system that uses such words but doesn't actually care about that, or actually is against these things, that makes you think that everything must conform to this like one universal grammar and stylization of speech. And so obviously, like, we don't want to like write in ways that make us impossible for our fellow travelers to read. But Levinas wasn't writing in a way that was impossible for his fellow travelers to read. None of these great thinkers are writing in a way that makes it impossible for their fellow travelers to read them. They're only writing for their fellow travelers and for their own comprehension when it comes to their high theory, like their greatest theoretical contributions. Maybe you'll find them speaking plain English elsewhere, like this book I'm waving in my hand right here. For those on the podcast who can't hear this, Emmanuel Levinas' Ethics and Infinity is a fantastic book, and I'll be talking about it briefly. But all that is to say, I will be getting into like the how to read here in a second. But before I get into it, I just want to say, like, the spontaneity of freedom that he's talking about, it is something that goes against totalization. Totalization is where, from your armchair, you could deduce, fundamental axioms that then allow you to build out an understanding of the world that encapsulates everything essential, gives you everything you need to know, and on the basis of that, you would be able to predict everything else that everyone else does, also the direction that history is going to go. And it is this sort of high modern, scientistic, sort of technocratic, or bureaucratic mindset that thinks, yes, a person can have it all figured out. And there's a sort of superficiality of self, a never being able to tarry with oneself, a not having developed a rigorous, complex, and infinite sort of home base in the self, in your interiority, in your memory palace, or what have you, that makes it so easy to underestimate and simplify and reduce everyone else. There's a sort of superficial projection at work, and you see it from people who think that they've got everyone else figured out all of the time. You see it when somebody, like, they don't see the complexity of what you're saying. They're not able to, because they themselves are just not very complex people. There's just not a whole lot going on in there. Okay. Now, of course, I'm projecting in a sort of sense, because the fact is like, maybe they're just distracted. Maybe they're jumping to conclusions in the moment, but most of the time they don't do that, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is overwhelmingly, most of the time, most people think of themselves like little Lego people that like certain things over other things, but they don't really have an inner life outside of, like, ideas that occur to them from time to time, but these are random and scattered and usually derivative off of the songs or media, that news, what have you, that they've consumed. And that's a very fractured, broken, and sort of like inhumane situation that we find ourselves in. The fact that is how I've spent the overwhelming majority of my life. The fact that that is how most people spend most of their lives, regardless of class belonging. And so, yeah, this is what he wants us to understand, is that humans are more complicated. Reality is more complicated, and human spontaneity really throws a wrench into the plans of the planners. Now, he's not anti-planning. He's not anti-state. He's not anti anything in this sort of like absolutist sense. But he wants us to meditate on first principles and first philosophy. And first philosophy for Emmanuel Levinas is the ethical relation. And for him, the ethical relation and the moral relation, that's kind of the same thing. And this is important because he is an ex-Jewish, well, no, he's not ex-Jewish, but he's an ex-POW who was Jewish in a Nazi internment camp. Okay. Now, he wasn't like being like, it wasn't like it wasn't Auschwitz or something like that. It was for POWs, specifically French POWs. And so on the basis of him being a French prisoner of war, he was not murdered like the rest of his family, right? There was some, because Germany was, their relations with France, basically POWs, yeah, they were treated poorly, but they weren't treated as poorly as, say, he would have been treated if he was in Auschwitz. So with that said, yeah, it's challenging, but it's not as challenging as Deleuze's difference in repetition. It's not as challenging as Heidegger's being in time. There will be this strong impulse to get out ahead of this text by first going back and reading everything essential from the history of philosophy, whether it be Descartes, Kant, Heidegger, Husserl, what have you. And I'm going to say, don't worry about it. Absolutely do not worry about it. I got several people who are monthly subscribers at Theory Underground. They're using that 90% off discount that they get as monthly subscribers so that they can go through this course with us. But also there are people who are just signing up for this as a standalone course, just a one-time thing. And a variety of you, probably a bunch of you are watching this right now, as well as people who've not signed up for the course, who are thinking about it or who are just finding out about it. All of you all have like this anxiety about like where to start. And several people have voiced the question to me over the last few days. People are starting to get the itch. People want to get out ahead of this. People are wondering, should I just start reading Totality and Infinity or should I start reading a secondary text? Do not read a secondary text. Do not read a secondary text. I cannot emphasize that strongly enough. I am your secondary text. Don't confuse yourself. I should have really just stated this more strongly during the Being in Time course, but a lot of people wasted a lot of time reading secondary texts instead of just reading Being in Time. Just read it. And then you're going to feel overwhelmed and you're going to be like, oh my God, I can't actually like understand. Yeah, that's the point, man. That's the point. So point one, don't try to remember / understand everything on a first read. If you get something from it, that's good. If you are thirsty and the only way to get a really quality drink of water is by being sprayed in the face by a fire hydrant, do you just stand there and try to get every single drop inside of you and then cry and beat yourself up because you weren't able to drink every bit of it and there's a bunch of water all over the ground around and behind you and on you? No, do not feel bad because there's more there than you're able to wrap your head around. We're just getting started. We have the rest of our lives to develop ourselves as thinkers. But not only that, we also get so much more from a text that is a rich primary text by revisiting it. You could go try to read every one of the great books from the canon one time, or you could pick 5 books from the canon to read and reread and watch videos about the rest of them. You could do either one. And the latter is a much, much more effective way to go. You've got to pick your mountains to climb. You got to pick your battles to fight. And there's no better way to take on the challenge of one of these kinds of texts than doing it with someone who's passionate about it. So when you already like to talk about other things anyway, and then slipstream that motherfucker. And so whether it's me or Mikey or Todd McGowan or anyone else that you love to see do lectures sometimes, well, slipstream them. Which, I mean, in racing or with Canadian geese when they fly in the V, it just means like the whoever's ahead of you is taking on more effort than you are, so that you who are maybe like weaker or tired or newer to it or what have you, you're able to kind of ride in their draft, which makes it easier for you, right? And
always with the intention of remembering this is not the final reading. This is the first reading. So, yeah, don't worry about understanding everything. Just get the lay of the land. Let your unconscious become like this roiling cauldron of questions that is trying to make sense of the language. That's the most important thing. Okay. Second of all, it's good to have a guiding question. You want to have a guiding question. Brian Weeks, who's teaching the introduction to Ivan Illich, he was just talking about this this morning. This morning, he gave the week 3 lecture for the Intro to Illich course. And he was talking about how he's really excited for Totality and Infinity. It will be his, I believe, second time reading it. Might be the third. I think he was reading it last summer without me. But we read it. It was my second time, and it was his first time. We read it with Bert a while back, a few years ago. And he's really excited to finally come back to it. And I'm excited for him to come back to it. And the fact that he'll be in the course is, to me, just like the best thing ever.
So, guiding questions. You should have a guiding question going into the text. Brian said that that really helps, and it should be something that you genuinely care about. What are some guiding questions to have in mind as you read this text? Well, it might just be to try to see the different ways that he talks about totality and the different ways that he talks about infinity. That is, after all, the title of the text, and that's going to be a great sort of through line throughout the whole thing. But there's a variety of other ways. For instance, you might be thinking, okay, so totalization is like this all-encompassing idea that acts like it's got the solutions to everything, right? Well, that includes, obviously, totalitarian regimes on the one hand, but on the other, it also includes capitalism could be a form of totalization. Everything being reduced to exchangeability and profitability. Like that itself is a form of totalization. You could try to pay attention to anything that might relate to that thread. Well, similarly, he's going to argue that language and cognition are basically in their bones, like all the way in, like essentially forms of totalization. Now, he's not saying that's evil or bad, but obviously there is if there is something inherent to language and cognition that has this tendency to reduce and then totalize, well then, yeah, I think we're going to want to, if we're critical thinkers or theorists, pay close attention to that tendency and see how that tendency creeps into everything that we do, right? Otherwise, you're not being genuinely critical. Well, there's a variety of other guiding questions that I put up on the board. For me, history versus natality. And he never calls it natality as such, but it's actually one of the really important concepts at Theory Underground that we've not we've not done anything on it, but there's a book called Natality. It's I don't know if it's a bestseller, but it's kind of like one of those more popular works. And it uses like Nietzsche and Hannah Arendt and basically any thinker who is thinking about new beginnings and newness, natality. It's going to be a really big theme next year at Theory Underground with the critique of gender and sexuality stuff that we'll be doing. Natality can, on the one side, be about actual birth, but it can also be about the birth of an era. It could also be about the bringing into being and cultivating and nurturing of a project or of an artwork or of a stylization of life. There's a variety of ways that you could think about natality, but of course, its root is in the idea of actual, like, bringing someone new into existence. Okay, so thinking about history versus natality, it's interesting. Levinas actually kind of starts out Totality and Infinity doing a critique of of history. He's critiquing not like the idea that there is a past, not the idea that there are old things, not the idea that things happened, No, to critique history is for him a critique of Hegel and Marx and Marxisms, but also of anybody obviously National Socialism was very like in its like, oh, got to make history, what's our role in history, but that was not just these extremes. It was also kind of everybody. And so history was like the master signifier for like 150 to 200 years of modernity. And, he's not going all Francis Fukuyama here and saying that we're at the end of history. He's instead saying, actually, history should not be the goal. Like, your goal as a human being should not be history, right? That might be the goal of some human beings. And maybe it is your goal, and maybe that's okay. But you should actually step back and think about it. What he wants you to think about is how the world stage that we talk about, like history has this, it's this world stage. And if you don't make it onto that world stage, and if you're not remembered by historians, well, then your life was worthless. You will be forgotten and nothing matters, right? He's going to say, actually, no. There is a deeper meaning to life outside of history. And he's going to, towards the end of the book, bring in this theme of natality. He doesn't call it by that name, but it's there. So I'll be paying attention throughout the book to that question. I'll also be thinking about his anti-politics. He was just saying on this page that I was reading something about how politics and justice, it proceeds from a critique of spontaneity engendered by failure, which is to say that like when people are spontaneous and free, they end up hurting each other. And then they feel called into question by the other or by others. And our sense for justice comes about from the fact that unbridled freedom results in all kinds of things. And so the beginning of that section, truth and justice, it says freedom called into question, right? So he's going to call freedom into question. But he's also going to call politics and its priority into question, the same way that he called history into question. Totalitarianism, obviously, is one of the questions that you could follow through. I already said that. Subsistence and dwelling. Okay, the good life. What is the good life? Well, in part, if not in whole, it is about dwelling. And subsistence is, for Ivan Illich, this idea that the meaningful life is like subsisting. Now, that doesn't mean like just eating when you're hungry or whatever. It doesn't mean just surviving. And it doesn't mean like, I was going to say it doesn't mean humbly living off the land. But in a sort of sense, it does for Illich. He's not saying everyone should go become a homesteader. That's not what Illich is saying because he's not anti-institutional. But he is saying that capital has been all about making it so we do not live in the state of subsistence, but that we all live in the mode of constantly accumulating, not things for our own use values, but things to be exchanged. And the obvious example is people who live in houses, whether they rent them or own them, they don't really get to live in them, and they don't really get to modify those houses to suit their needs. Why? Because they're not dwelling, they're living in exchange value. Okay, so I want to pay attention to that. And then finally, this was the one that Brian brought up when we were hanging out after the lecture, interiority. He wants to pay attention to interiority. That's a word for insideness. Interiority, insideness, the inside of you. What does that mean? Well, for Brian, the reason he wants to pay attention to interiority is because he has like this sort of gut sense from his first reading that Levinas is basically saying that if you do not have an established sort of center or sense of self, and this sort of analogy he was using in his lecture today about like the memory palace or the memory castle or whatever, like a rich inner life. If you've been all hollowed out and you haven't gotten to develop that in genuine quality time spent with oneself, not bubble baths and, long walks. We're talking about like self-building time, right? Self-building exercises that come through reading and writing and reflecting, and maybe also through memorization. If we don't have that, then it's kind of whatever. It's just kind of random fragments of this and that going through, and then you want to go scroll your phone, but you don't really have like this sort of ground. And when you don't have that, then it makes it really, really easy to assume everyone else is kind of like you, and then you underestimate human potential, right? If you've gone from being a sort of empty vessel to being like having like a rich inner life, you see the potential of others, and you also see the injustice of others not having access to the convivial tools of this sort of self-creation process, or this self-rootedness that you can get by having some basic texts that give you something more every time you come back to them, and that ultimately help you like be in the world outside of just the present moment, but like sort of have like this sort of structure to your life. And that's necessary just for being a human, right? And so that's like what we think about it at Critical Media Theory, like seminar at Theory Underground, like all the time, like solitude and solicitude, genuine being with oneself, genuine being with others. These two things require one another. They mutually enforce one another, and it creates this good cycle. But if there's a breakdown in that, well, then you're fucked. Finally, the last of the big 3 points is secondary texts. Should you read them? And I already said no because I jumped ahead. But if you look at the whiteboard, there's like this line that goes down. It says, instead, well, what is the instead? The instead is this other book I was waving around earlier. Our Way into Levinas should not be a secondary text. Secondary texts are really good for the second reading. But for the first reading, your goal should be to dive in the deep end, stay confused, keep reading even when you're confused, and to just get a sense for his vernacular. But if you're looking for something to do in July, to prepare for August, because this lecture series begins in August, then Ethics and Infinity is where you want to begin. There are also other places to begin. There are other texts that I would recommend. Existence and Existenz is very important. That is something that he wrote while he was a POW in a Nazi camp. He wrote Existence and Existenz, which is sort of his development of the Heideggerian, being versus beings, but like he wants to go beyond that and bring in morality, because here he is in this camp and he's thinking about things deeply, of course. Well, Existence and Existenz is actually pretty short work, definitely worth reading. It's going to be really hard, brutal, but definitely worth doing. This is easy. Ethics and Infinity is it's conversations with Philippe Nemo. He's interviewed by this guy, Philippe Nemo. And this is the clearest you'll ever get Levinas. And so, he'll talk about the importance of Heidegger to him, and also like how he was affected finding out that Heidegger became a Nazi. Like, he'll talk about Husserl and his way of thinking about Husserl. He'll also talk about his intellectual predecessors and the intellectual predecessors to his own sort of mentors, largely being Durkheim and Bergson. Really cool part. He'll tell you what he thinks God is, which is cool. He's got his theological sort of element, but it's a very idiosyncratic one. It's very, 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 very Jewish, according to people. I have no idea. I don't know what Jewish theology is any more than I do most other kinds of theology, because I'm a stupid plebe and I don't fucking know about theology, really. Not until next year when Samuel Loncar teaches theology for atheists at Theory Underground. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a great time. But all I'm saying is focus on Ethics and Infinity if you want a tiny little easy access book. If you've been impacted by Martin Buber, though, if you love I and Thou, or if you ever had a phase with I and Thou by Martin Buber, then Levinas, you should think about Levinas as Heidegger and Martin Buber made a baby. And that's basically Levinas. Levinas is like if, I don't know, if Buber was like just, I mean, I like, I think Buber's cool, but like Levinas is like Buber, but like on this other level, like for real. And, well, Levinas wrote a essay that is like an expansion pack for Buber. It's in dialogue with Buber. Buber's name is in the title of the essay, so it should be easy to find. And you can find Existence and Existenz as well as the Martin Buber essay, as well as the piece where it's like Husserl's phenomenology, like Levinas writing about Husserl's phenomenology. You can find all of that in the Levinas Reader, which you can pick up for yourself probably for $20. You can get it for free probably on a website that might not be legal in your country, so you'll want to look into that. But you know, something like Library Genesis or Anna's World or whatever, like those are all options for you as well. But the Levinas Reader is where you want to go for all of that. And actually, yeah, if you like consuming this kind of content while you're doing things, there is a video that I did with Nance. It's like 4 hours long, I think, maybe it's shorter. And it's basically an exegetical discussion of us like reading and talking about that essay that he wrote about Husserl. Levinas made phenomenology popular in Paris, France. You know, it's like Sartre also did, and Sartre was also there kind of around the time that Levinas was, but Levinas was the first person to translate Husserl into French. And so he's the bee's knees. I also actually have like a graveside tour video that I did with him that I'll hopefully release very soon here because I've been sitting on it for a long time and I want to get it out. It happened in like November 2022. So got to get that published sometime. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else that I'm forgetting, but I think that's pretty much it. I'm really stoked for this course. If you couldn't tell, I'm a big nerd for this kind of thing, obviously. And if you are interested in other thinkers, but you're kind of interested in Levinas, here's the thing that I would say. Slipstreaming, like the principle of slipstreaming people means that if you have other people on your radar, like other human beings that teach and they're teaching something that is interesting to you, but it's not your first priority of what you would read in an ideal world, go with them anyway, because you're going to get a lot more out of it if you get something from that person's talking or teaching style. So if you get something from my lectures, if it helps you unlock things, then trust me, diving in the deep end, being confused, and then eventually unlocking this text is going to accelerate your intellectual, comprehensive, and interpretive capabilities at a rate so far beyond anything else possible. You really want to just work with wherever we're at. Don't worry about going back to the beginning and catching up. Just jump in. Learning, language, meaning, they're retroversive, which means retroactively certain things become clear. It's not linear. That's just a product of the schooling system making you think everything has to be learned that way, that everything requires certification and like stair steps and that it's not real knowledge if you didn't like pass an exam or what. We don't do any of that stuff here, right? So join us. And for everyone who's already joining us, thank you for asking these kinds of questions. This video wouldn't exist if it wasn't for people DMing me on the Theory Underground Discord for the monthly members. Thank you to all of you for asking these kinds of questions because it motivates me to do something other than the million other things that I'm doing. And this kind of thing is my favorite kind of thing to do. So thank you. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added tier 0 and tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me, so thank you so much. Especially thanks to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sahil Kumar, Suxandra, Darian Large, Tyler Murphy, Max Mackin, Al, Algeri, Ben Rosenblum, Atlantic Airlines, Lewis, Matt Payne, Neil C., Simon Condon, Yiz, and Schwabkinson. Thank you.